Mr. President,
The senator from Wisconsin.
are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Mr. President, I rise today to tell a story of one family's tragedy, but also of two wonderful people who turned that tragedy into helping others and finding solutions. On May 15, 2014, a 19-year-old Wisconsinite named Archie Badura died of a fentanyl overdose. 2 years later, I met his mother, Lori Badura, who testified before a field hearing I held in Pewaukee, Wisconsin, together with an emergency room doctor named Dr. Tim Westlake, who testified about the growing problem that he was seeing in his emergency room with overdoses, and in particular overdoses with, I think, a drug that we all heard was somewhat new, fentanyl. Schedule II drug, one used in medicine, but one that had been altered. The molecule changed and produced in China and shipped through our postal service, and we're killing people like Archie Badura. It's probably the first time I heard of what was happening to fentanyl. And so Dr. Westlake, because he was seeing the tragedy firsthand, was developing a piece of legislation that he was proposing in Wisconsin as well as on a national level. The piece of legislation I introduced in 2017 was called the SOFA Act. The reason I called it the SOFA Act, and that stands for Stopping Overdoses of Fentanyl Analogs, because Lori Badura, who lost her 19-year-old son, turned her tragedy into helping others. She was the go-to person for other families who also lost a loved one through overdoses. And she started an organization called Saving Others for Archie. The acronym was SOFA. So I thought it only appropriate, when working with Dr. Tim Westlake on this piece of legislation, that would recognize the growing problem, these analogs of these fentanyl-related drugs that were killing and poisoning our citizens. I thought it only appropriate to come up with a piece of legislation named after that organization with that same acronym, SOFA. So on July 13, 2017, I introduced SOFA for the first time here in the United States Senate. On November 9, 2017, because of Tim Westlake and Lori Badura's tireless effort, a state piece of legislation, the SOFA equivalent, was signed into law in Wisconsin. And basically what this law does, it's a pretty simple law. It just allows law enforcement, the DEA, to view these fentanyl-related substances as a class under Schedule I of the Controlled Substance Act. Prior to this bill, prior to these regulations, law enforcement had to view each new molecule, each new analog as a separate drug, and they could not arrest, they couldn't prosecute, they couldn't put people in jail for selling these and poisoning our cities. So Dr. Tim Westlake recognized that problem. I recognize that problem. And so we introduced the SOFA Act, and once DEA saw it, they thought this was a pretty good idea, and they utilized their regulatory authority and passed a regulation on February 6, 2018. They issued a temporary scheduling order that placed, quote, certain fentanyl-related substances in Schedule I for 2 years. The text of that regulation was identical to the text of the SOFA law that I had introduced earlier in 2017. Now, unfortunately, they could only issue that regulation, have it in effect for 2 years. So as it was about ready to run out, Congress extended that regulation in an act of Congress, and we've extended it 6 times. President Biden has signed that extension 5 times. But the problem is the extension of that regulation runs out on December 31st of this year. Now, the Biden administration, I think it's important to understand that in its 2021 budget proposal, called for class-wide fentanyl scheduling. DEA Administrator Ann Milgram said, quote, "The permanent scheduling of all fentanyl-related substances is critical to the safety and health of our communities." She added, quote, "Class-wide scheduling provides a vital tool to combat overdose deaths in the United States." Now, why have we extended this regulation 6 times? There's no need to it. We could pass the law, which we've tried to do a number of times. But the reason we keep extending it is because it's worked. It's helped stop the flow of these precursor chemicals coming out of China. China's actually cracked down on these analogs within China. So the regulation worked. The SOFA Act is vital, according to Ann Milgram. Something else I want to point out about the SOFA Act is, in an almost unprecedented, this is very rare. In 2018, all 50 states' attorney generals, plus the attorney general from the District of Columbia, including current HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra, who was an attorney general for California at the time, signed a letter to congressional leadership urging that Congress act expeditiously and pass the SOFA Act. Mr. President, this is such a common sense piece of legislation. It works. It reduces the number of types of fentanyl on the streets, killing our citizens, killing our youth, killing people like Archie Badura. Again, the DEA had a regulation for 2 years. Congress has extended that regulation 6 times. All I'm asking is for the Senate to pass this common sense, life-saving piece of legislation by unanimous consent. And so, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S. 1006 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. Further, that the bill be considered read a 3rd time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table. I ask this in the name of Archie Badura and on behalf of Dr. Tim Westlake and a wonderful woman, wonderful Wisconsinite named Lori Badura.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I took chemistry in high school. Wasn't very good at it, but I think I got a B, and I was glad to get rid of it because I didn't understand a lot of it, and that was not where I was headed in life. The question which the senator from Wisconsin puts before us today is a complicated question. It seems easy. Do we have a drug crisis in America? Yes. Is fentanyl dangerous? Yes. Is fentanyl deadly? Yes. Is fentanyl on Schedule 1 the highest possible narcotic rating under our criminal code? Yes. So what is this discussion about fentanyl? Why are we at this again? I don't know the senator from Wisconsin's background in chemistry and the like, but here's how I understand it and why it's not as simple as paying tribute to this young man who lost his life to fentanyl. And I can come up with examples that I've run into as well. It's heartbreaking what's going on. There are certain elements that contain fentanyl that have other chemical structures, not simple fentanyl, which is already a prohibited narcotic under American law. And these so-called analogs of fentanyl have many chemical variations. It turns out that some of them are deadly dangerous, but some of them are not. It turns out that some are deadly dangerous and others may have the promise to be the next Narcan for the researchers. So we have been struggling literally for years with a research community that says, when it comes to fentanyl analogs, don't sweep them all into category 1. Some of them may be lifesavers, as odd as that sounds. It could happen. And I have been saying it's a reasonable argument, but how long is this investigation going to go on? How long will this research continue? We're told that it is sincere and real. It's happened under previous administrations and this administration, and that to sweep all these chemical analogs of fentanyl into this category would be, frankly, counterproductive. We may be walking away from something that's a lifesaver rather than a life taker. And it's because of that that we have been temporarily extending the decision to put fentanyl and its analogs on category 1, so that this research can establish whether, in fact, there is a lifesaver, there is something positive in a fentanyl analog. I've just given you the sum total of my understanding of this issue. As I said, I didn't major in chemistry and barely got through it in high school. But I think that's where we are. I don't think there's any disagreement between us that fentanyl is deadly and dangerous and belongs on that category 1. When it comes to the analogs, they say to me, Durbin, you're a liberal arts lawyer. Don't act like you're a chemist. Give us the time to do this right. Sure. Yes.
So I would just make the point that there's nothing in the SOFA Act that would prevent that research from continuing. And if a molecule is found that is helpful, it can be scheduled separately. This is just targeting the deadly drugs that are not helpful. So there's nothing in this that would prevent that type of research, which is why, Congress has reauthorized this or extended this 6 times. And the administration, the Biden administration, supports this. They say it's vital that we're able to class all these fentanyl-related molecules together so that we can enforce our laws and prevent death. So again, there's nothing in here that prevents the research, which I would completely support.
Well,
again, molecules are amazing things, and changing them can change the characteristics. But we have to recognize how deadly fentanyl is. We've gone from slightly more than 50,000 overdose deaths in 2015, the year after Archie Badura died, to over 107,000 last year. And we're on a path to break that record too. So again, this has been supported on a bipartisan basis. We've extended this. I just have to say that the research argument just doesn't hold water.
There's an element that the senator from Wisconsin may not be aware of. When a drug is on Title I, it's prohibited to do research on it. That is the reason why we're running into problems with cannabis. Now legal in my state, maybe in your state as well. And I've asked a basic question. Are the health claims about cannabis true or false? And they've said we can't research it because it's on the list of prohibited drugs in the United States. The problem is if we put all these analogs on the list, it's going to stop the research that we need to finish. It's a catch-22. What we try to do is temporary extensions saying, give us the final word. We've got to make a decision. I do not quarrel with you in any way about the danger of fentanyl, but the people who do this for a living, and I can't keep up with their conversations by and large, explained to me that we are trying to find a good use of a fentanyl analog, and don't close the door, slam the door by putting it on Title I because research stops.
Would the gentleman yield again?
Yes, of course.
Fentanyl is being used in medicine today, and it's a Schedule II. So they can do the research off of that drug that's Schedule II. There's nothing preventing that, nothing whatsoever.
I would just say that my information is a little different. And I respect the senator from Wisconsin and his tribute to this poor young man who lost his life. But we're trying to do the sensible thing. Fentanyl itself is going to continue to be branded a dangerous drug in Category 1. But fentanyl analogs, a variation on that theme is what we're discussing. And for reasons that I'm trying to bow to the experts in science and research on a temporary basis, believing if they've got something, we want to see it. If not, we're going to go ahead and categorize them as Schedule 1. So for the reasons I mentioned, I'm going to object.
Mr. President, Again, I find that unfortunate. I would hope that the senator from Illinois would not at least object to, I think, Senator Grassley to come on the floor looking for another extension of this. Again, the DEA administrator says this is vital. So I hope at a minimum we can extend this for a seventh time, and they maybe come back when some of these issues are resolved and maybe finally pass SOFA, possibly in the next Congress. But again, Mr. President, I yield.